you as much as you want, and let's start. So let me a little bit elaborate about what is it exactly futures studies. Generally speaking, the field is called futures in plural because there is no one future. There are actually infinite futures. And what we are trying to do is to organize the futures into four categories. The first category of future is what we call the probable futures, which means that when we do this study, uh, those futures have the validity of something like 70 or 80% chance that they will be realized, that they will happen at the end. There is another category, which is the possible futures, which is their validity is something between 50 to 60% chance of being realized. And there is a third category, which is what we call wildcard futures, that at the time you do the study, their chance of being realized is about 20 to 30%. And we are doing a lot of those kind of studies because there are a lot of scenarios that if they happen at the end, they might really shake the foundation of a lot of things. Think about October 7th, how it has shaped everything. And there is a fourth category, which is the preferable futures, in which we are studying if what you think is preferable is really good or bad. A lot of people think that if they prefer something, it's probably very good. But it turns to be that a lot of things that we think at a certain point that are preferable at the end are very negative. And the idea is to prepare the decision-making processes to understand the landscape of opportunities with the different degrees of reliabilities in order to make our decision making as effective as possible. This is actually the main idea of futures thinking. Okay, the idea is not to try and foresee the future. Who are we to see the future? Okay, it's so difficult. It's not even a human ability to see it in a very clear way. The idea is to understand the trends in order to go back to the present and see how you can and how we can change what we think might happen. If it's a positive issue, then the idea is to develop strategies to make those positive issues or trends a little bit more positive. And if it's and if these are negative issues or negative trends, then the idea is to try to avoid those trends. This is the basic idea of futures thinking. That's not to say that we really think that we as a species can even know that what might happen 5 minutes from now. Put it in mind because I'm going to show you what we think at the moment is the future. It doesn't say that this is what will happen at the end. But if we see or if we pinpoint some negative things, the idea is to try to figure out what can we do at the moment in order to avoid it. Okay, so let's go back to the infinite multiple kind of futures. And the way we are trying to study the future is because this discipline is actually just a branch of another discipline in academia, which is called systems thinking. We are systems researchers. We try to understand how systems are evolving. And by system, we mean basically everything from economic systems to geopolitical systems to social, technological systems, it doesn't matter. And the basic assumption in future studies is that there is logic how systems are evolving. And we're trying to figure out that logic. Okay? And we are trying to figure out that logic with a lot of methodologies. You see just, a bunch of them over here. we as futurists, we are also developing methodologies with which we are trying to understand much better the trends that are evolving. This is the basic idea of future studies. Generally speaking, the discipline is a scientific discipline for about a century or so. And a lot of people did a lot of studies in the last 80 years or so. And basically, or generally speaking, about 70% of the studies that were done with valid methodologies, about 70% were at the end correct, which is, I hope you understand that it's not something that we can, just dismiss. Yeah, we wish to be able to base our decision making upon only those 70% chance that things will at the end be realized. All right. I believe that's enough for an intro to the field, even though it's for me it's so short. But I believe that's enough for you to get into this specific topic today. What I would like to stress before I go to a little bit elaborate about some mega trends that are going to shape the 21st century is that the global trends are different than the Israeli trend that we are going to see in the 21st century. It's very important to put it in mind. We tend, to constantly see ourselves based on a lot of indices that compare nations, etc., etc. But there is a locality, very important locality to each nation, to each group worldwide, that if you are not aware of that specific specification, you might do horrible mistakes in your decision making, and you'll see what I mean. Not only that the global trends are different than the Israeli trends, the global trends are really opposite to what we're going to see in Israel. It's very important to put attention to those differences while we are trying to figure out what are the challenges of the Jewish people in the 21st century and of course of the Israeli people in the 21st century. So let me start by introducing a mega trend, okay, that is going to shape almost everything in the 21st century. Okay, I'm going to pick a variable which is called a demographic variable. In future studies, the demographic variable is called the destiny variable. Everything that happens to all of us is based upon the demography that we are inserted in, that we are part of. Everything, okay, from our social life, economic life, geopolitical, circumstances, and even the genius of our offspring. Everything is based on the demography in which we live in. So let me introduce you to a term. If you didn't hear about it, it is a very good opportunity to hear about it. It is called now in the literature the global demographic winter. So let me give you a sense. I'm going to take you back in time a few thousand years back, and then I'm going to show you the next century based on those millennia. Let me see what happened in the last something like 12,000 years. All right, it's a very important landmark in human history. About 12,000 years ago is the time that at least science is speaking about this species, which is called the Homo sapiens sapiens. That was the end of the cold era, okay, freezing era, and humanity started developing what we call agriculture. Okay, and basically we are the outcome of what started to develop about 12,000 years ago. Okay, so as far as we know from a scientific point of view, again, about 10,000 years ago or 12,000 years ago, generally speaking, there were on this planet about between 1 to 5 million people like you and me. Okay, by the way, about 60,000 years back, okay, they were left, according to a lot of studies, only about 10,000 people like you and me on this planet. Okay, we almost disappeared too. By the way, we are called in science Homo sapiens. Homo sapiens was born about 300,000 years ago in Africa, and then it spread across all the globe. And up to now, there were about 6 variants of the Homo sapiens. We are the 6th variant, and the other 5 variants actually disappeared. And 60,000 years back, we also almost disappeared. All right. This is just an anecdote to make sense of the larger picture of what happens to us as a species. So about 12,000 years ago, we were about 1 to 5 million people, as far as we know. And bit by bit, humanity grew, and also, during many times during those years up to about 2000 years ago, humanity lost a lot of people, basically in catastrophes like COVID, what we have seen. Okay, but take a look. It took us about 10,000 years to go from 5 million people to 50 million people. And then about 2,000 years ago, something started happening. It took us only just 1 millennia to do the same thing that we did 10,000 years. Okay, we went from 50 million people to 500 million people. And then you see the curve, how it goes in a manner that is called now the extrapolation curve, the amazing extrapolation curve. Take a look what happened. It took us about 800 years to double to 1 billion people. And then it took us only about 30 years, 130 years to again double from 1 billion to 2 billion. And then only 30 years, another billion, another 15 years only for another billion, another 12 years, another billion. And you see how the extrapolation is really fascinating. Now, I don't know if you know how many people at the moment worldwide, but as far as we know, there are about 8 billion people. Okay, there are some differences. It depends where and where, because of COVID, there are differences how many people died during COVID. The formal figure is about 11 million people, but a lot of studies are pointing that just in China, for example, there were about 135 million people that died from COVID. Okay, so as far as we know, but we are about 8 billion people. Now, whenever we see such a curve, it doesn't matter in what field or in any domain. Okay, we know that there is no, from a systemic point of view, there is no system that is developing, growing in such a manner that will continue growing. There's no such a thing in nature. Okay, so what we are trying to figure out is what might happen in the next decades, because of just thinking about the system as a system. All right. So as far as we know, again, with the reliability at the moment of about 80%, okay, by the year 2050, humanity will reach its peak. Okay, there are studies that are even pinpointing the exact time, 2055, humanity will reach its peak between 9.1 billion to 9.5 billion people, and then it will start shrinking. Okay, and as far as we know, this is what we think might happen at the end of the 21st, in the second half of the 21st century, right? We're speaking that there are a few scenarios when we do those kind of studies. We do three types of scenarios: the high probability, the mid probability, and the lower probability issue. And we might go up to 11 billion people in some unusual circumstances. But there is a greater chance that humanity will go back in a matter of only half a century, go back to 6 billion people, the way we have started the 21st century. So it might happen that in the 21st century, we are going to start 6 billion, we're going to go up to 9 or 9.5, and then go back in a matter of just 50 years to 6 billion people, which will be devastating by all means. Okay, and there are a lot of studies that are trying to figure out how humanity is going to react to that trend. Okay, the idea, by the way, in doing those kind of studies, is to see what we can do at the moment in order to a little bit, change or affect this trend. Because if we will be aware of it as a collective, of course, and the decision making of our leaders will be to do something, we might not slide back to 6 billion, but go back maybe to 8 billion people and not lose the whole 21st century. And that will do a great difference. Just think about economies, think about actually most of the trends in all kind of domains, from technologies to world wars. Everything is affected from this kind of figures. And just on this chart here, there are libraries that are being at the moment written, try to in an effort to understand the impact of what we might or we probably are going to see in the 21st century. By the way, this is your life. Okay, this is the time in which you're going to take action, to lead, to do a lot of decision making, either personal decisions or communal decisions, etc., etc. So this is what we call the global demographic winter. For the last 50 years, most of our experts said that the most devastating trend of humanity is what they called the explosion of demographies worldwide. But what we see now is exactly the opposite, the shrinking of demographies. And this is really a very different kind of world, of society, of economy that we are going to see in the 21st century. So this is really the global point of view of the grand trend, the mega trend that is going to shape the 21st century. There are a lot of reasons. I don't have time to go and elaborate on the reasons and the studies that are validating the numbers we have just seen, because I really would like to focus on the Jewish aspect of this mega trend. Okay. Any questions up to now? Great. I can continue. Oh, you have a question. Go ahead. Ask.
Yeah, thank you. This is extremely interesting for me. I was just wondering, I bet for many of you, but just a couple of years ago, the conversation was exactly the opposite, that it was an overpopulation issue. And I was also thinking about like resources, even climate change, and all of this, I guess, huge trend. And in the past 2 years, I guess, I've been hearing more about this population winter, demographic winter. And I understand the trend, but like what changed and how, in my lifetime, not even my lifetime, in the past 10 years, seeing that dramatic change from overpopulation to actually the problem being exactly the opposite. How do you account for that when you are thinking about the year 2100 and the
Okay.
dramatic sort of like even technological shift? Right now we're talking about like AI and robotics and having more robots than humans in the next couple of decades. So that for me at least changes the how do I say, like the playing field. It changes the way we even experience the world. So I don't know. For me,
Okay,
thinking about
Alberto. I got
2100 is feels far away.
okay. Alberto, we are speaking, we are doing research on this issue already something like 30, 40 years. So I have been speaking about it for many, many decades. Unfortunately, the masses are not aware of those trends. Only when they start being realized, suddenly everybody is speaking about it. Okay, so even though you are familiar with it or just heard about it a couple of years ago, but these trends are very established and very, very valid for at least my whole career. Okay, I finished my PhD in Minneapolis about 35 years ago, and we were speaking about it already. So what I'm going to speak about are trends that they take many, many years to mature. Okay, there are some things that are very, very hard to foresee because they take, it takes some time. Let's say in some technologies, they take only a year or a couple of years to mature, and then and it's very hard at that point, to try to figure out what are the trends. Even though, from my point of view, most of my time is not doing research on demographies. In my lab, I'm using a lot of very advanced technologies, and advanced technologies, they take decades for 3D or for brain-computer interface or for AI to mature. But people are suddenly, aware of it only when they are out of the blue, when everybody is speaking about them. But we futurists, we tend to speak about trends decades before they happen, even in things like technologies. Think about AI. AI is a domain of research during the 70s. I did my PhD during the late 80s, and we already spoke about how AI is going to change the world. So even though you didn't hear about it, but this is how futures thinking is trying to help humanity think about things as early as possible. So let's go and
Thank
see.
you.
It's okay. Let's see what happened with the Jewish demography during the last millennium. As far as we know, again, from a scientific point of view, okay? Because there is a religious point of view, which is a little bit different. Not so a little bit, but very different than the academic scientific figures that are being published based on studies that are being done in different ways. So as far as we know, about 3,000 years ago, okay, that was the time of the King David, okay, 3,000 years ago. As far as we know, there were in Israel about 300,000 Jews. We were not called at the time Jews, we were called the Hebrews, okay. People started calling us Jews only something like 500 years later, when after the destruction of the first temple, and because the main tribe that survived that epoch of 500 years was Judea, and then we were called Jews. Okay, so 3,000 years ago, we were about 300,000 people in Israel. All right, now let's go forward very fast. Okay, how many Jews were about 700 years ago? That's worldwide now. All right, It's a very important landmark in Jewish history, which is the Golden Age in Spain. Alberto, you are from Spain, isn't it?
Originally from Peru.
Peru. Okay, fine.
Yeah.
All right. So about 700 years ago, the Golden Age in Spain, there were about 1 million Jews. Out of those 1 million Jews worldwide, about 600,000 to 700,000 Jews resided in Spain. That was Manhattan of the time, if you wish. Okay, 500 years ago, in the expulsion, the Spanish expulsion, about 500 years ago, about 300,000 were expelled, and another 300,000 Jews. At the beginning, they moved to Portugal, and then they disappeared. And most of us, at the moment, most of us worldwide, even if you are an offspring of a Jew from Poland, probably you are part of those 300,000 Jews that were expelled from Spain. Okay, and you can see it in genetic studies that a lot of people are doing. That was 500 years ago. 200 years ago, worldwide Jews were about 3 million Jews. Okay, 200 years ago, by the way, worldwide humanity, the numbers were about 1 billion people. And out of those 1 billion people, 3 million were Jews. Okay? And then something unusual happens. In a matter of about 140 years, just before World War II, okay, humanity went from 1 billion to 3 billion people, and the Jewish community went sixfold almost, between 17 to 18 million people. Okay, there are some differences between scholars debating exactly how much, because at the time nobody was counting. Okay, Professor de la Pergola, I believe, gave you some kind of a little bit different number last time, if I recall. That was his last time that he spoke to you. Okay, but generally speaking, we are speaking about an amazing era in Jewish history in which we went from 3 million to about 17 or 18 million Jews. Okay, and then came the Holocaust, and we are losing about half of the European Jewry community, about a third of world Jewry, about 6 million, and we are left with 12 million. And then we started bit by bit, to recover. At the moment, based on a lot of calculation, now it's much easier to calculate, even though it's not exactly calculated. And by the way, when we speak now about figures, we're not speaking about Jews according to halacha. We're speaking about Jews that are sociologically connected to Judaism. If somebody says that I'm a Jew, we are counting them. Okay? So at the moment, we're speaking about 15.8 million Jews worldwide, including Israel. Okay, so we are recovering. It takes many, many years. And we are recovering very slowly because of two reasons. One is the fertility rate of the Jewish communities worldwide, which is basically less than the replacement rate, which is 2.1 kids for a female. And the other reason is because of assimilation. Assimilation at the moment, again, a lot of people are saying different numbers, but generally speaking, where we are, the estimate is that at the moment, worldwide, not in Israel, the rate of assimilation is about 60%, plus minus. Okay, which is devastating by all means. And this is the reason why, we are recovering very slowly. Now, if you really want to understand how the state of Israel is a savior in our time, take a look at the following figures. Okay, let's debate. Let's speak about the first one. How many Jews would have been at the moment worldwide if the Holocaust wouldn't have happened, and the state Israel also would have no, and the state of Israel would have been established. Okay, so if there was no Holocaust and there was Israel, so based upon on a lot of studies that are taking into account fertility rate, assimilation, Israeli fertility rate, a lot of things, the estimates are that if there was no Holocaust and there was Israel, would have been now more than double than we are at the moment. And this is a very heavy load on each one of us. You as probably as an individuals, we don't feel it, but we as a collective, it has a great effect on all of us. Subconsciousness of us.
Sorry to disturb you, Professor. Just a quick question. This is taking into consideration that Israel would have been established in which year?
It established after the Holocaust.
Like instead of the Holocaust, Israel established in 1930.
At the end of the 40s, as
Okay.
it was. Okay, even though it's very hard to do if exercises in history, but we can do those kind of exercises to see what might have happened. Okay, so this is one way to see what would have happened. The other figure is very important also. If the Holocaust didn't happen, and the state of Israel also was not established, so no Holocaust and no Israel. Okay, no Holocaust and no Israel, and this is the number, about 20 million Jews at the moment. All right, but the most important figure is the following figure. If there was no Holocaust and there was no Israel, okay, and this is the number, between 6 to 7 million Jews worldwide at the moment, less than half of nowadays, which means Israel is having a great effect on the fate and the destiny of the Jewish people. Without the state of Israel, Jewish history would have been totally different at this very moment. Okay, and we have to put it in mind because it has a great effect on the psyche of the Jewish people, those figures. Okay, the idea of saying no more, or this is, and we are so afraid and we are behaving the way we are behaving when we are attacked, is based on this psyche. We are traumatized from the 20th century. Okay, so let's see how many Jews in Israel at the moment. Okay, these are the numbers. Actually, about 4 or 5 years ago, the Jewish people has passed a threshold in history. For the first time, after 2,600 years, okay, from the destruction of the first temple, for the first time after 2,600 years, the largest Jewish community resides in Israel. We're speaking now almost 46% of world Jewry resides in Israel. Okay, 2,600 years, that was not the case. All right. Now, if you want to a little bit delve into the numbers, in Israel now we are more than 10 million citizens. Out of those 10 million citizens, there are about 8 million Jews. Okay, and about 20%, 21% minorities. And those foreign workers you see over there, they are not citizens, but they are still counted because they have visas. All right. So this is the snapshot of 2025. This is the Jewish people in 2025. About 7, 8 million Jews in Israel, and about another, if you wish, 8 million or 8.5 million worldwide. But the most important thing, okay, is that something is in the making, and it is very clear. What we see, by the way, if you want to see how many Jews in different places worldwide, you can see here the numbers as far as we know, but those numbers are not, precise, because communities worldwide tend sometimes even to exaggerate the numbers because of political issues, etc. But let's take those numbers as if they are really the exact numbers. This is what we see. Okay, France now has the largest Jewish community, then Canada, then the UK, then Argentina. At the end, you can see Panama, about 10,000 Jews in the community over there. All right. Now, how many Jews will be worldwide by the mid of 21st century? Okay, which means about 25 years from now. How many worldwide, and how many of them out of them will be in Israel? According to a lot of studies. All right. So these are the numbers. The numbers are the following. First of all, as you see here, actually it takes world Jewry to recover from the Holocaust exactly a century to be back about 18 million Jews worldwide, which is, a century in personal life is a lot, but in history is nothing. Okay, so by the mid 21st century, there will be about 16 million citizens in Israel. Out of those 16 million citizens in Israel, 12 million Jews and 4 million minorities. Okay? And what you see over there means that in the mid 21st century, 65% of world Jewry will reside in Israel. Okay? Now, I would like to stress a very important point. In 1938, before the Holocaust started, there were about 18 million Jews worldwide. Out of those 18 million Jews, 12 million were in Europe. Okay? A century later, we reverse the table. 8 million Jews back worldwide, but for the first time in history, 12 million Jews will reside in Israel. So this is the global context, okay, the macro view, if you wish, of Jewish history during the 21st century or the first half of the 21st century. And I'm going to say it up front at the moment, okay, because I'm going to show you another figure. The 21st century is the century of the Jews. We are not just recovering from the Holocaust, we are recovering as a nation, as let's say, a nationhood too, not just a nation or a community or whatever. Okay, something very, very significant is in the making, and I'm going to try to explain what is it exactly, what those numbers are pointing to. Okay, so by the end of the 21st century, I'm going to give you the figures that the UN are publishing. Okay, and then I'll show you the numbers that we are speaking about here in Israel. And these are the numbers. Okay, by the end of the 21st century, according to the UN, with a reliability of more than 90%, there will be 24 million residents, citizens in Israel. Out of those 24 million citizens, 20 million Jews and 4 million minorities and others. And about 80% of world Jewry will reside in Israel, which is probably the first time in Jewish history. Even during the biblical times, okay, the first time, even during the epoch of the first temple, there were no 80% Jews residing in Israel. This will be the first time in our history that about 80%, and of course the numbers, which are totally different than the numbers we've seen in ancient times. Okay, this is the UN estimate. The UN has a very large project which is called the UN Population Project, and they are doing constantly forecasts about most of the nations worldwide, how they are going to evolve during the 21st century. And this is the UN number. However, here in Israel, we're speaking about a different number because the UN is not taking into account a few variables. For example, they're not taking into account anti-Semitism that is, again, coming out from the darkness. And we are speaking about that by 2065, there will be about 24 million citizens in Israel and about 20 million out of them Jews, which is fascinating on one point, to see those numbers. On the other one, it's frightening because this is a challenge. This is something huge that we have to deal with. How do we, take care, establish a state, a new nation, an advanced nation in such a pace of development, and take into account that at the same time, humanity, generally speaking, is shrinking. Exactly the opposite. Okay? So let's see some of the challenges. Are we in time? Yeah, we still have time. Okay. So the first challenge is in the 21st century, we have to build at the same piece of land another two states. And they have to be much more efficient and much more equal, much more democratic, if you wish. Everything needs to be much more than it is now. Otherwise, we will lose our offspring to nations that don't have enough kids. And our kids and our offspring will just, live. A great challenge. I believe this challenge is much, much bigger than establishing the first phase of the Jewish state. By all means. Okay? Now let's see some of the identity challenges that are emerging from this demographic background. Okay? Let me first of all mention that here in this presentation, I'm just touching upon very few points from this book I have published 2-3 years ago, and it's also in English. If you wish, go to my website and you can order it. It was published in English by an English publisher. And it's also in different places you can find it. Okay, so from this book, I'm going to collect a few ideas to share with you because I believe something really very significant is in the making. And if we are to face the challenges, and challenges are also, sometimes challenges are positive challenges, and address those challenges as early as possible. Remember, Alberto, early as possible, not after everybody already sees the numbers and the trend. This is what's so important about futures thinking. Okay, so let's see the challenges. I'm going to touch upon two challenges. The first is the identity challenge. The second is the leadership challenge, right? I'm going to use one of the most known analogies that everybody is aware of. When Marco Polo was sitting with the Mongolian Caesar, one day the Mongolian Caesar asks Marco Polo, "Where are you from?" And Marco Polo tells him a story. He says to him, "I'm from Octavia, a city. And that city is really an amazing city, a very unusual city. It sits above the skies, okay, up in the skies." By the way, a very beautiful analogy to our personal life too. It's not just an analogy of the social life, okay? So this city is hanging in plain air, and what most of the citizens of this city are doing is to take care of the city so that it will not collapse down and bring havoc to the citizens. And what they're all constantly doing is to take care of the shackles, or if you wish, the net upon which that city sits upon in heavens. A beautiful analogy to most of our life. This is what we're doing. We are taking care of our existence so that we will not collapse. We will have our houses as they should be. We have our careers developing neatly, etc. This is what we're doing in our life. So this is the analogy. I'm going to take this analogy and put it on the Jewish identity during millennia. Okay. By the way, if you are from Spain, and not only Spain, there are a few cities like that worldwide. Similar cities, not exactly the same. Okay. Ronda, for example, is one of them. It's not only Ronda, there is another one, as far as I know, in Italy. Anyway, it's above, and it's not easy to take care of a city that is really on top of hills. Okay, by the way, the other city, if I'm not mistaken, a week ago, part of the houses that were built in the front edge of some hills collapsed, and a lot of houses just disappeared. Anyway, so I'm going to take that analogy and say the following. The Jewish identity, as we know it today, has developed during millennia, okay? 3,000 years, at least, if not more than that, according to Jewish tradition, about 3,500 years, all right? And what we have done during those 3,500 years is to develop a net that is built from 4 types of ropes that were woven together so that we as an entity will be able to sustain ourselves, because we constantly, when we were going with that psychic attitude that everybody is going, we are about to be extinct. For millennia, we were going with that mindset. We are constantly even singing it in our holidays. Okay, so in order not to go extinct as an entity, we have built a rope that is woven from 4 different ropes. And for millennia, we sat on that very solid rope, okay? And that rope that were woven from 4 different ropes are the following, okay? The first one is what can be characterized as the halachic mindset, okay? The rope that said that if you follow the halacha, you have a greater chance to survive and not to go extinct. That's the first rope. There is another rope that we have developed during the years, which is the, if you wish, the ethnic rope, not the halachic, the ethnic rope, which means we are a group of ethnic people that we have developed some kind of ethnicity, and if we know how to keep that ethnicity alive, then we'll be able to survive. Okay, and there was a third aspect of that woven rope, which is called the language. Okay, we know that the language nowadays is a crucial part in the way every group is developing. It has a great effect on how they see the world, how they understand the world, how they interact with the world, how they generate ideas. The language has a great effect on our mind, how we generate ideas, and of course, make even scientific discoveries. Okay, that's the third aspect. And there is a fourth aspect, which is what we call the civil aspect of us as an entity. What you see in brackets at the end of each one is what these are actually the thinkers that thought that this is the most important rope that is crucial in our survival in time. Okay, so again, for millennia, we were able to weave a rope from those four aspects, and we were able to sit on top of that rope so that we will not go extinct. There were some people that said it's difficult for us to stay on that rope, and they left. And during Jewish history, most of the time, Jews left Judaism. Most of the time. There were very few times in Jewish history that others came to join this entity we call Judaism at the moment. Okay? By the way, we are at a certain point in history that some really want to join back, or just anew, or for the first time to join this entity. And they want to join this entity because of Israel. Okay, according to De La Pergola, for example, Professor De La Pergola, there are about 24 million people worldwide that consider themselves as descendants of Jews. Okay, and some of them even do some, some things to come back to Judaism, and some of them even would like to join the Israeli community in the following years or in the coming years. Each group is different. Okay, most of those groups are, part of them are in Asia, a lot of them are in South America and Central America. Okay, so during 3 millennia, we were able to develop a net of ropes that was solid enough to sustain part of us during time and during difficulties in time, and bring us into the 21st century. And what happened in the last actually 70, 80 years since the establishment of the Jewish state, and some scholars speak of even in the last 120 years since the establishment of the Zionist movement, is that net that was built from 4 different nets or 4 different rope is dissolving. And now we are speaking about different ropes that are separate. And each one of us that considers himself or herself as a Jew stands on a different rope and believes that only the rope upon which he or she stands is the rope that will be the rope that will sustain the Jewish entity, will be the one that will survive time, etc., etc. And we came to a point now in Jewish history that each one is sitting on the different rope, and each one believes that the other ropes will bring extinction to the Jewish people. Now, this thesis I'm speaking about can be backed up by a lot of studies, but the person that started that thinking is Professor Abulov, and he did his PhD on this kind of idea. The idea is he actually analyzed the discourse of the Zionist thinkers in the last century, and he came to the conclusion that the Zionist movement was debating for a century those four aspects of existence. And there were different views. There were views that said the halachic one is the most important. The others said no, the cultural one. The other one, others said that the language aspect is the most important. And what the conclusion of his studies, that was his PhD actually. Nowadays he's a professor at the Tel Aviv University. And the conclusion of his PhD was that the Zionist movement during more than a century could not decide what is the hierarchy of those aspects, what is most important, less important, etc. And what we see at the moment in Jewish history is that Jews, generally speaking, are debating a lot of issues based on the rope they are standing on. And we reached a point in history in which not only that it's impossible anymore to speak with each other, but every group believes with all its guts that the disaster will come from the others and will be extinct because of the others. This is basically, if you wish, a grand thesis about the diagnosis of what's happening now to the Jewish people and what's happening in Israel, of course. Okay, because we have so different ideas what will sustain this group in the coming, at least centuries. Okay, and we believe with all our guts that the others are going to bring havoc to the Jewish people. Some of us, by the way, can stand on two ropes from time to time. That we can see with a lot of studies. Now, if I take this theory and I try to see if I can back it up with some demographic numbers, then it looks like something really amazing is happening in Israel, in the diaspora, and something very different is developing within the Jewish community in Israel and within the Jewish communities in the diaspora. And here I'm showing you one of the very last studies that were done trying to figure out how the Israeli Jewish community is shaped, what are the most important parts of that their identities. Okay, this is a study that was a kind of objective, not a subjective study. A lot of studies that are asking people, what do you think you are? What do you think you are Haredi, if you are Dati, or whatever? They tend to accept subjective answers. But those kind of studies are not valid. because people have in mind different definitions of Haredi, different definitions of Chiloni, different definitions of a lot of things. What they have done in this study is that they have developed a tool with 10, hundreds of questions about different things, different ideas, different activities that a person is doing as a Jew, and the computer is deciding in what group to put you as your identity, how to categorize you, or how to categorize your identity. You are not saying, you are not defining yourself, which is very important. Okay. Now, probably at the moment things are a little bit different because of the war. The things are shifting. Most of the studies point out that there is a shift, but nobody knows if that shift will be permanent or it's just because of the war, and things will go back to what they have found in this study. So what they have found, and I would really urge you to go to the website of this study and answer their question to see where you stand, which might be very surprising to many people. I'm doing it with my students, and a lot of students, they think that they are the team, but they are not the team that as they thought because of that study. So that study says the following. Generally speaking, in Israel, and then I'm going to speak about what happens abroad. In Israel, there are about 17% of Jews in Israel that can be considered halachic Jews. Okay, they are mostly concentrated on halacha and minimizing, if you wish, national ceremonies. Okay, about 17%. Now, on the other side, there is about 13% Jews that, if I can categorize them in my language, not the language of the study, these are a group of people that actually gave up on their Jewish tradition. They don't want to see any Jewish aspect in the public arena in Israel. Okay, and there are a lot of things that are happening that they pinpoint to that group of people. They don't want to see any religious or Jewish aspect of Jewishness in the Israeli nationhood, if you wish. This is the 13% in Israel. Above them there is another 15% that they don't want to see any Judaism aspect in the public arena, but they are not against it. The first group, that those 13% are against having anything Jewish within the Israeli state. Okay, the second one, they are not against it, but they don't want to see any Jewish aspects of Jewish life aspect in the public arena. And the most surprising group that the study have found is this group, which is called the Masortiim in Israel, okay, the traditionals. And this group is growing and is taking from the halachic one, and is taking also from that 15% group, mostly because of the war. There is if you wish, a recovering of understanding that our Jewishness is critical in this time in history in Israel. Okay, so this is actually the group that is growing. It is going to have a great effect on Israeli politics in the future, on the if you wish, how should I say it? The social life of a Jewish state. They will define what is it exactly a Jewish and democratic state. The other parts, the halachic one, generally speaking, they don't want to see a state without Jewishness, without halacha. Okay, the others, they don't want to see a Jewish state with halacha. This group, with the traditional group, will develop something new in Jewish history. And this is actually what I would like to a little bit elaborate upon. But before that, let me show you another study that was done in the States. Again, an objective kind of study, not a subjective kind of study. You know, the Pew Research Center developed another tool, objective tool, with which they tried to understand how the different religions in the States are spread, what is the type of religiosity there is in different religions in the state. And they found a tool of 7 scales, okay, a scale of seven tiers, if you wish. But they have divided it into 3 tiers: what they call the highly religious people, the somehow religious people, and the non-religious people. And they analyzed the different religions in the States, from Sikhs to Protestants to Muslims to Jews, whatever. When they analyzed the numbers, what they found is what we call the Gauss curve. Most of the people are concentrated on the middle part of religiosity, and in the sides you can see the extreme, the highly religious or the non-religious. Okay, the Gauss typical curve. When they analyzed the Jewish community, they found a very different curve. And this is what they found. They found about 34% are actively religious. And in this part, not only Orthodox people, okay, if you are active, if you are conservative, or if you are a Reform Jew, you are part of this group. Okay, about 34%. The middle is the smallest part, exactly the opposite than the other religions. And the largest group is the group that is in the extreme, part that don't want any connection with any religious institute, with any kind of communal activities as a Jew, etc., etc. Okay, this is the largest part, which is remarkable, this study, because this study points to how the 2 communities, the Israeli community and the American community at least, are bit by bit separating, and the gap between them is growing because of that. And we have seen it, by the way, in this war. There are a lot of people that came and against Israel in this war. Okay, so this is just an anecdote of the American Jewry. So let's go to the first challenge based on those mega trends we have just discussed. The first is, can we weave anew those 4 ropes in order to rebuild a strength upon which something that will be much solid to base the Jewish identity in the 21st century and the 22nd century? I believe it's already very late. We have developed so separately that it's impossible anymore even to talk to each other. And you can see it in the discourses either in the mass media or in the social media. It's impossible to even hear each other. Okay, not only in Israel, by the way, it's all over the world. Okay, I believe that we need to develop a new, different rope upon which we will base our identity as a nation that has a state, that has sovereignty again, that is taking care of a piece of land, which we didn't do for 2,600 years. Something totally different. And that totally different thing can be expressed in the following way, which is called the raison d'etre of a new nation. Any nation that wants to build itself has to define a covenant of faith, something to that you go from, you run away from, okay, and something you are heading towards. And it has to, that covenant brings together different groups that have different ideas, and they gather around a new idea to achieve and to realize in the future. It's not enough to run away from something. And most of the new nations that have developed in the last 300 years actually went from something, a fate that was devastating, and they organized themselves around a new idea to establish a new state, new institutes, new, if you wish, kind of law, etc., etc. Okay, so these are the two things. The Jewish people, the Israeli state, generally speaking, or Zionism, has based its raison d'etre from the covenant, so that our fate, our past will not repeat itself again and again. The basic idea of Zionism was, let's organize ourselves in a nationhood so that our past will not repeat itself, our devastating, cruel past will not repeat itself. That was the basic idea. And the greatest achievement, at least from my point of view, of Zionism is that it said to the different groups that used to be in Judaism all the time, Zionism said, this is this time to be quiet, not to argue. Let's first build a nation that will protect us from what we have seen in our past. And it was amazingly, and for some even surprisingly, very successful. And we see it at the moment, even though from time to time, we are still running from our fate. What happened in October 7th, it's another phase, it's another event that we are trying to run away from already for 2,600 years. And the idea is to build a new idea that will bring together all those parts. It has to be a new idea that is based on our past, based on our present, on understanding the world at the time, and understanding some of the challenges of humanity. And a lot of the different nations have done it already. Okay, for example, the US have done it. The US is exactly an example of the group of people that run away from Europe, from Catholicism, and built a new state that is with a great new idea, which they call very simply, personal freedom. They based the whole idea of the new entity of the American phenomena upon a very simple two words idea, which was not new, but they have built a nation around it. Okay, France also went through a devastating civil war in order to break from the past and go to the future. And they have developed also an idea upon which they have built a new nation. And like the French, it's always a little bit more sophisticated, not 2 words, but 3 words. Okay. The EU also now, based on what happened during World War II, it was devastating. And they said to themselves, we need to come together. Otherwise, we will keep killing each other again and again. We need to run away from our past and build a new nationhood entity. And bit by bit, they have developed what we call now the European community. But they understood that they need a raison, they need an idea that can be summarized in 2 words. And around it, build institutes, build societies, etc., etc. And this is, probably part of you are familiar with. This is what they came up with: unity in diversity. Okay. By the way, even China, Mao Zedong, after a devastating civil war and after a century of humiliation from the West, they have renewed an idea upon which they are building almost everything. And if you are not familiar, this is their idea. It's called the all under heaven. And China is the middle kingdom, that the whole world needs to be circulating around China. It has a lot of impact on their understanding of the world, on their understanding of trade, and understanding of the what kind of superpower they need to be. A lot of things. If you are not familiar, I will really urge you to go and study a little bit the idea of the Chinese people. But everyone needs an idea upon which they bring together the different parties, the different ideas that are many times conflicting each other. And this is the first challenge of the Jewish people in the 21st century. It's generating a new idea that can be, summarized in 2 words, upon which or with which we can bring together a lot of parties, a lot of the perspective to develop a nation that will survive at least for 2 or 3 centuries ahead. And then from time to time, do amendments. All those countries are doing amendments from time to time to those ideas. Okay. Now, in my book, I was trying for many years to understand what might be an idea that can bring together those 4 aspects of Judaism that have separated in the last century. And the most important thing from my point of view in the book I have mentioned is that I am developing a formula with which nations can develop a new raison d'etre. Okay, but I'm also giving an example of what might be such an idea. Okay, but I know I'm very well, I recognize that I am not in a generation with the mindset that can really break apart from the past and generate totally something new. It's your generation that is going to do it. But the challenge is that it has to be taken into consideration, great literature from the past, Jewish literature, understand a new understanding of what's happening in history at the moment, and most importantly, understand the most important challenges of humanity in the next 2 centuries. Not what we think at the moment. It has to be something different. And bring all those together with a formula and generate an idea that can resonate not only to all those groups within, but also to outside nations, so that nations outside Israel will say, now we understand who we are. Now we understand where are you heading to. Because you all know a lot of people now still don't recognize Israel as something that is has the backup of history, that has the right to exist, which is mind-boggling. You know, we are still struggling with a lot of nations that do not recognize our right of existence. And one of the reasons is that nobody understands who we are. Because if we say we are a religion, then immediately they will say, okay, a religion doesn't need a nation. You can be an American Catholic, an American German, an American Swiss, and you can go to war with each other. There is, first of all, nationality, not religiosity. And this is exactly what they say, by the way. A lot of our neighbors here in Israel, they say the same thing. They say, you know, you are actually something that has developed because of the Holocaust. And what made you as a group, a national group, are the Europeans because of the Holocaust. So the Europeans need to take you back. You don't have the right to be a nation. So we need to develop that layer of nationhood. We were able to develop a very good layer of religiosity or religion during the last millennia, at least a couple of millennia, okay? But we are lacking one of the most important aspects of nationhood, which is the raison d'etre of a nation. And here I'm just giving you one option of what might be such an idea. Okay, because what I'm trying to say is that just to add another tier to what the Americans did as personal freedom. The problem with personal freedom is that, you know, everybody now in the West, at least, has become the center of society, which is called what we call atomization of society. And it was developed because the idea that the person is the most important thing, is the center of everything. And the nation, the institutes, everybody is working for the individual. And we know that idea is having troubles. We see nowadays how democratic, at least, nations are breaking apart because everybody thinks he is the center. Think about what happened during COVID. There were people that said, I will not take a shot. I have a personal freedom to not take a shot. And others will tell him, but because of you, other people might die. And this is one of the problems of democracies at the moment. What I was trying to say is that there is a way to give another, to suggest another amendment, if you wish, to the idea of personal freedom. And that might be an idea that Israel can introduce to the world. And by the way, it is backed up by a lot of literature, Jewish literature from the past, understanding the issues of the present and understanding the challenges also of the future. Now, I don't have a lot of time to elaborate, but you can see the idea of a collective freedom, not personal freedom, is that it is stressing not the individuality, but it is stressing the intergroup interchanges. The more there are exchanges between groups, the more they have its value, the more they have weight, and they are excellent. And the idea is that if you want really to bring together opposite ideas, you have to not look for just how to make to satisfy, let's say, everybody. That's not the idea. The idea is to bring all the opposite views and generate a very different mix that can emerge from those views. And nobody was able to see it before. This is the idea. It is backed up by Jewish literature. It is backed up by new sciences, new ideas of sciences, but I don't have time here to elaborate on them. I would just leave it as a challenge to your generation to generate a new idea upon which we need to bring together the different parties that make what we call now the Jewish entity. The other challenge is who might be the leaders that will take upon themselves to generate those ideas. Again, as a futurist, I'm looking at patterns in history. And through the patterns, I'm trying to foresee things. I'm not to impose anything. I'm just trying to foresee trends. Okay, and here I found a very interesting, kind of interesting, if you wish, pattern in Jewish history with which I can extrapolate who might be the leadership mindset that can solve this problem that we have found, that I have described in my presentation. Okay, what I found is that there were about 4 epochs in Jewish history, very distinct from each other. Each epoch had different leaders, different narratives, different psyche, different aims, everything was different. Okay, what I found is that each epoch, the first 3 epochs, used to be plus minus something like 500 years. And each epoch started with a great idea, a new idea that was very different than the ideas that were circulating around at that time. It took about 300 years to develop, to establish, to fortify, etc. And in the last 200 years, things came apart. And there were a lot of differences between different groups. At the end of every 500 years, there was a horrible historical event. And then we started back again, developing a new idea and developing institutes and different leaderships and different things. Again, 300 years of building and 200 years of clashing with each other. And at the end, another event. Okay, so the first epoch is the epoch that can be described as the forefathers or foremothers or tribal, if you wish, epoch. Okay, that was since since we went out of Egypt to around the first the David epoch, if you wish. Okay, the king's epoch. And the leadership was different. The idea was even the way we have organized ourselves was very unusual at the time. It can be called now a kind of a confederation of tribes, not kingdoms that used to be at the time. Okay, each tribe used to be in different place. They had their leaders, and from time to time they will convene and vote and pick up one of those leaders to be the leader of the whole Jewish people. Okay, and then they started to kill each other, to fight. At the end, it was a horrible. The Bible is speaking about rivers of blood that flew because of those civil wars actually that happened. And then we started a new epoch in which we switched our way of organizing ourselves back into the king's type of organization or kingdoms. Okay, And then it started with Saul and then David and then their offspring. And then in a matter of just a couple of 100 years, they started killing each other. They started fighting each other. And they were separating themselves even with a wall. We know now there was a wall between Judea and the 10 other tribes. And nobody was able to move from one part to another part. And at the end of that epoch, of course, there was the destruction of the first temple. And then we start again with a new idea, a new way of organizing ourselves. And the leadership mindset was the leadership of priests, not of kingdoms. Because the priests said, well, the kings just brought havoc. And the king said, no, the tribes brought havoc. And the priest said, we are much more, let's say, closer to heaven, and will organize society in a much equality manner, in a much better way, etc. And then again, they started fighting, they started killing each other. At the end, there was the destruction of the second temple. And then we moved to the epoch we have just seen in the last something like 1500 or 1800 years, the longest epoch, in which we have switched our kind of leadership. We said no more siblings or kings that are taking over leadership, but meritocracy. If you are a thinker, if the community accepts you as a leader, then you are the leader. And this is what we have seen. And it has actually ended. It ended about 5 years, according to the way I understand, at least the figures we have went through in this presentation. I mark it as the time in which the largest Jewish community resides in Israel. It started to be in 2020. Okay, and we have now to reimagine ourselves back, to redefine a new way of thinking, a new kind of leadership, a new narrative, if you wish. This is a great challenge that awaits the Jewish people in the 21st century. It's not an easy one. It's actually the reborn of this entity which is called Jewishness. And what I'm trying to understand, who might be the leaders, who might be the mindset, what might be the mindset of leaders in the next phase of Jewish history that will solve the current problems and will come up with new ideas around which we will organize ourselves for another 500 years or another millennia, doesn't matter, because we will need constantly to develop. And we were able to do it in history. Not many nations, not many groups have done it in history. A lot of groups disappeared from time to time. We were able because we have changed. We were able to recover from a disaster, understand what happened, and we did, a leap of faith in time, if you wish. Okay, now in order to see who might be or what might be the mindset of the future that will solve the problems, I found that on each epoch there was an elite, and there were actually two groups of elites that were competing among themselves who will lead. Always one elite was on the upper hand, and when the disaster came, the elite that was the secondary one, or that was pushed out aside in the previous epoch, took over. And they said, now we have the chance to do what we thought is better for the Jewish people. And this is how we developed. During the tribal era, the kings or the kingdom's mindset was put aside. And then when the tribal era collapsed, the kings recovered and said, now we are going to do better than our predecessors did. And during the kings era, there were the priests that were competing with the kings to be the elite that will lead the Jewish people with different narratives, different ideas, etc., etc. If you are familiar with how the Bible is describing those conflicts, it's an amazing thing to follow when you see it in this way. Okay, and then the priests also have failed, and they have brought havoc, and they were a group that thought themselves as the deliverers of God's ideas and God's words. And then came, of course, as we all know, another rabbi, which was called at the time Yehoshua, and then became Jesus, and it challenged the rabbis, the priests, but it didn't help. And then the Romans destroyed everything, and then the rabbis, because Jesus was a kind of a rabbi. That was the beginning of the rabbinical era. And what we have seen is that the rabbis have led the last two millennia, led the communities, led the ideas, and developed amazing literature that is something unbelievable if you are just familiar with it a little bit. The idea is, if I am able to diagnose who were put aside, what kind of mindset was put aside during the rabbinical era, I would say that they will be probably the people or the mindset that will lead the next stage in Jewish history. And they will come up with new ideas. They will come up with let's say, with different solutions to the problems that we are familiar with at the moment. I believe that the mindset, I'm not speaking about specific people, it's a mindset that was put aside during the rabbinical era. It was not put aside, by the way, during the other eras. Only during the rabbinical eras, okay, is the feminine mindset. It was put aside. It was the feminine mindset didn't bring itself into the front of the discussions of the problem-solving tables. In the identity discourse, not in the political discourse, if you wish. I'm speaking about thinkers. I'm speaking about people that are generating new kind of thinking. And I think that it matches also different trends that are developing worldwide. It's not something that will be unique to the Jewish people. But up to now, in some communities, the feminine mindset took over the leadership of communities, okay, but not the leadership of the thinking leadership, okay, the group that can generate ideas that solve problems, not just take care of let's say communities politically or organization-wide challenges. I'm speaking about not even what we have seen in the last 60, 70 years as a trend worldwide. I'm not speaking about social feminism. I'm speaking about more idea thinkers, wave of groups that they don't have to be feminine. They can be even masculine, but they have a feminine kind of thinking. And I believe that this is the time for you ladies to take over, not organizing your communities, but coming up with new ideas that will help us enter the new era of in Jewish history. So I'm 15 minutes late than I used to, but not. Well, I have started exactly on time. If you have any questions, please just write down the name of the book if you want to elaborate or read a little bit more. It's in Hebrew, it's in English. And if you have any questions later on, if you wish, I have a lot of lectures and podcasts in my YouTube. You can go over there. Some of them are also in English or in Spanish. And if you have any questions, just send me an email. You have my website over there. There is a way to communicate with me. Most of the time, I'm responding very, very fast.